The public housing secret the government didn't want you to hear. Hundreds of properties rented out on the private market while families languish on long waiting lists for subsidised housing. A whistleblower lifted the lid.
Stop your rorts, because that's what it is. It's a rort just to get more money.
Public housing properties should be for our most vulnerable, not for private rental.
Consider the people who are already on the waiting list waiting.
No matter where you live in Australia, government subsidised properties can be very hard to find. So imagine the shock of discovering public housing like this being rented out on the private market.
It's a typical suburban street where many young families would love to set up home, and the little brick house at the end of the cul-de-sac doesn't seem out of place. What is strange, though, were these for rent signs placed out the front a few months ago.
How could it be? Because I knew for a fact that it was definitely public housing.
We've agreed to conceal this whistleblower's identity. After seeing the signs, she decided to call up the real estate agent to ask some questions.
And I said, but it's a public housing house. And she said, well, that's none of your business. And she hung up on me.
It was listed for rent for $300 per week. The pictures advertised online reveal a clean and tidy 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom house with a carport on a 600 square metre block. It was eventually rented out for $280 per week to a young mum who didn't know it was public housing.
She was beside herself because she'd been on the housing list for 3 years.
Single mum Maria has also been on the waiting list for a home in this exact same area for 3 long years.
What are you told when you call housing to see how you're progressing?
Oh, that I'm still on the list and, not to worry, but I'll be informed if a property comes up soon, but I'm not a high priority.
She's awaiting the arrival of her baby any day now and says she's unable to rent privately.
How did you feel when you heard this property was being rented out privately?
Offended almost. Yeah, there are so many houses on the private rental market, so just leave it as housing.
Those people would be pretty cheesed off to think that public housing is being used for private rental.
Tim Mander is Queensland's Deputy Opposition Leader. Since he was Housing Minister, the number of people on the waiting list has skyrocketed from 16,500 to 25,000, with 7,000 of those currently listed as homeless.
They would absolutely do anything to be in a public housing property. And what does this government do? It puts it on the private rental market.
We take full responsibility for the most vulnerable people.
Housing Minister Mick de Brenny.
How much more vulnerable could you get than being homeless?
Well, it's absolutely not correct to suggest that people who are on the housing register don't have a roof over their head.
But the minister's own breakdown of that 7,000 homeless figure listed them as either living on the streets, in makeshift housing, in refuges, shelters or crisis accommodation.
All of them sound pretty vulnerable to me.
Oh, absolutely. And we know that vulnerable Queenslanders need a hand. That's why we refuse to sell off the public housing system.
Except this home in Logan, south of Brisbane, has been earmarked for sale, and that's why it was listed for private rental on a 6-month lease.
The department is looking at redeveloping that property. They're considering their options around whether or not we should build on that site or whether we should liquidate it and sell it.
You're criticising the previous government for wanting to sell off public housing.
Indeed,
right
yeah.
Here we're talking about a property that you're about to sell off.
Yeah, that's right, but we're adding new properties to our stock, and we may very well build a set of townhouses on that.
The minister revealing a total of 300 public housing properties are currently being rented out privately as part of its strategic asset management review, with a promise it will add more than 5,000 new properties over the next decade.
The reasons were rubbish. It was just, they were feeble, I might look stupid, but they didn't even fool me with that.
While those on the waiting list are left wondering when it will be their turn.
What would it mean to you to get a place like that?
Everything. I'd get my life back. It'd be amazing. I don't know what else to say. It would change my life.
Housing departments in Victoria and New South Wales say they don't lease any of their properties out as private rentals.